Morning, everyone. I have the pleasure of, I'm Jason Isaacson. I didn't do that the other day when I was introduced someplace in Washington. I'm AJC's Director of Government and International Affairs, and I'm proud to be the moderator of today's debate on Iran policy. I'm joined by two extremely distinguished representatives of differing points of view on the issues that we'll be discussing. First, on my immediate left is Dr. Mike Duran, the Roger Hertog Senior Fellow at the Saban Center at the Brookings Institution in Washington. He specializes in Middle East security issues. Mike, in the administration of George Bush, was Senior Director in the National Security Council, responsible for devising and coordinating national strategies on a variety of Middle East issues, including Arab-Israeli relations, U.S. efforts to contain Iran and Syria. He served as a senior advisor in the State Department and a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Pentagon. To his right, to his left, your right, is Dr. Colin Kahl, Associate Professor in Security Studies Program at Georgetown University's Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service and a Senior Fellow and Director of the Middle East Security Program at the Center for a New American Security, a nonpartisan Washington, D.C. think tank. From February 2009 to December 2011, Dr. Kahl served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. During his tenure, he played a lead role in shaping the Pentagon's efforts to counter Iran's nuclear weapons ambitions and destabilizing activities, promoting unprecedented defense cooperation with Israel, building a regional security architecture in the Gulf, designing and overseeing the responsible drawdown and transition strategy in Iraq, and crafting the department's response to the Arab awakening. So we have two experts from different administrations, different perspectives, and we're going to be discussing the interim deal that was struck in Geneva on November 24th, 2013, between the P5+1 powers and Iran. We're going to talk about the dimensions of that deal, the promise that it holds out, the possibilities that it may, in fact, lead to a comprehensive deal that will thwart Iran's nuclear ambitions. I hope we will discuss whether the timing of the deal was correct, whether the conditions, the trade-offs that were required to make that, theoretically required to close that deal, were necessary, whether 5 months after the election of Hassan Rouhani as the president of Iran, that was the right time to reach out for a deal, or whether perhaps a little more patience would have produced a different kind of deal. All of these will be issues that we'll be discussing, as well as Rick mentioned, the Iran sanctions legislation that AJC has supported helps the process or hurts the process. So I think the best way to do this is to start with someone who can talk about the deal from the perspective of support for the deal. And so, Colin, I'd ask you to begin, and then Mike will respond.
Well, great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you this morning. I went to graduate school in New York, so it's always wonderful for me to have the chance to come back to Manhattan. I don't know if a number of you saw, but several days ago, Director of National Intelligence Jim Clapper made a statement that actually the intelligence community has held since 2007, which is that Iran has all of the technological capabilities and knowledge to produce nuclear weapons should it decide to do so. This is not a new capability. It's something they've had for a long time. The key is the political decision to do so. I say this because as much as we would like this problem to completely go away, there is nothing to include completely dismantling every last aspect of Iran's nuclear program which would put this genie back in the bottle. They have the technological knowledge to do this. So not more sanctions, not more diplomacy, not more war, not even regime change would remove all risk of Iran becoming a nuclear power at some point. I say this because I think the best that we can hope for is an enduring and peaceful diplomatic outcome that has meaningful and verifiable constraints, that keeps Iran as far away from a bomb as possible, would shrink the amount of time as much as possible so that if they ever moved in this direction, we would know, and one in which the United States, Israel, and the rest of the international community had sufficient leverage and options on the table to interdict that process were Iran to make that fateful decision. To my mind, nuclear diplomacy with Iran aims at achieving four objectives. One is to lengthen the so-called breakout timeline as long as possible. When I use the term breakout timeline, people use it in different ways. I actually mean the time at which the time from a point of decision to go for nuclear weapons that it would take Iran to produce the fissile material, the weapons-grade material for the first bomb. All right, not the whole bomb, not the weaponization, not the missile, not that aspect, but the fissile material, because that is by far the hardest thing to produce, and it's also the thing that would happen first. Second, so you'd want to lengthen that breakout timeline as long as possible. Second, you'd want to shrink the detection timeline as much as possible. You'd want to be able to detect at the earliest possible moment when and if Iran made this decision. Third, you would want to provide assurances that you could detect not just what they were doing in open and declared facilities, like the enrichment facilities in Natanz and Fordow, but also whatever clandestine or covert facilities they might establish, because after all, Iran has a track record in this regard. And then last but not least, you would want to maintain sufficient leverage and options to enforce compliance with whatever diplomatic agreement you had. I will argue that measured against these criteria, the so-called Joint Plan of Action, the interim nuclear deal struck in Geneva on November 24th that went into effect on January 20th, is actually a pretty good first step. First, the deal itself meaningfully, although modestly, lengthens the breakout timeline required for fissile material. Prior to the deal, outside experts, most notably David Albright and his organization, the Institute for Science and International Security, estimated it would take Iran about 2 or 3 months from the point of decision to produce enough weapons-grade uranium for its first weapon. All right? Not a lot of time. They also calculated that over the first 6 months of this year, Iran could shrink that breakout timeline to about 2 weeks. Under this deal, you add about a month or two of breakout time. So you go from 2 to 3 months to somewhere between 2.5 and 4 months. But most importantly, you prevent Iran from shrinking it down to 2 months. And the reason the deal does that is because it neutralizes the stockpile of 20% so-called medium-enriched uranium. You probably remember when Prime Minister Netanyahu stood before the world at the UN about 1.5 years ago with kind of a cartoon bomb and said, this is the line in the sand. If they generate this much 20% enriched uranium, we could go to war. Well, this deal, by preventing Iran from enriching to the 20% level and neutralizing their existing stockpile, drains Netanyahu's bomb, that cartoon bomb. Secondly, because the agreement freezes centrifuge installation and operation, it prevents Iran over the coming 6 to 12 months from making additional advances that would allow them to skip a step. That is to go straight from 3.5% low-enriched uranium, which they still produce, ostensibly for civilian nuclear power, although they don't really have a need for that, all the way up to weapons grade. If they had more centrifuges, more advanced centrifuges, and were spinning and operating more, they could skip a step. The agreement limits that risk by preventing Iran from installing or operating additional centrifuges. Third, there used to be inspections every week or two at the 2 known enrichment facilities in Natanz and Fordow. Under this agreement, inspectors will visit those facilities every single day. Why does that matter? Because if you have a breakout timeline of, say, 2, 3, 4 months, and inspectors are visiting those facilities every day, it is inconceivable that Iran could use those facilities to produce weapons-grade uranium without the international community seeing it with enough time to react to it, whether that be the United States, Israel, or somebody else. Fourth, the agreement requires early notification of new nuclear facilities and, most importantly, allows inspectors for the first time to start visiting things like uranium mines and mills and centrifuge production and manufacturing facilities. Why is this important? Because it'll give the international community and, frankly, our intelligence community a much better, higher fidelity picture of Iran's nuclear infrastructure, which will make it easier to notice whether they divert any of that infrastructure to start building a covert or clandestine site. Last but not least, much of the attention is focused on the uranium pathway to nuclear weapons, but Iran is also building a heavy water reactor at a place called Arak, which is A-R-A-K, even though it sounds like Iraq, the country. They claim they need this as a research reactor. They don't really need it for a research reactor, and the concern is that it could produce 1 or 2 bombs worth of plutonium every year, that if they had a reprocessing facility, which they don't have and claim they don't want, but if they had one, they could create weapons-grade plutonium. The biggest near-term concern is not that. The biggest near-term concern is that they could turn this reactor on. Because once this reactor becomes live, it becomes unbombable. It becomes a fait accompli. It's a fact on the ground that can't be changed. Because to try to bomb it, if we did it, the Israelis or somebody else did it, it would create a Chernobyl-like incident in the Persian Gulf. You can think of the environmental, human, and economic consequences. So the question is, can you stop it from becoming operational? And one of the things that the Geneva deal does is prevent Iran from building a single additional fuel assembly. They've only built about 1/5 of the fuel assemblies they need. And they can't load any of the fuel nor load any heavy water. So as long as this agreement is in force, they cannot make the Arak reactor operational. Is this deal sufficient to resolve our concerns about Iran's nuclear program? It is not. But it's not designed to be. It's designed to create 6 to 12 months to negotiate a final deal that would resolve a lot of the remaining issues on the table, which we can talk about. And most importantly, to have that time be a time period in which Iran cannot do what it's done for years, which is talk while continuing to build up additional capability and creep closer to a nuclear weapon. This basically freezes their program in place so that we can have the next 6 or 12 months of negotiations without Iran creeping closer to a bomb. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike, best deal? Right deal at the right time?
No. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Thanks for being here.
I'm going to take the exact opposite position, actually. It doesn't. Somebody's against me. It doesn't. It doesn't freeze the. It doesn't freeze the program in place, not by a long shot, and it actually incentivizes them to whittle us down, to string us along, and so on. The White House has mischaracterized the deal. I think willfully, actually. You can see it in the body language clearly. We don't have the document in front of us. The document is in a cone of silence in Capitol Hill, where if you're a staffer and you can read it, but you have to go in, you have to get rid of all of your electronics, and you go in, you're not allowed to copy it. Now, why is that? Also, the White House didn't put out the Joint Plan of Action. The White House didn't release it. That is, the document that's in a cone of silence is the January 20 document. The November 24 document, the White House didn't release. The White House released a fact sheet, which had words in it like dismantle. Then the Iranians released the actual agreed document, and the foreign minister, Zarif, went on CNN, many of you probably saw the interview, and he said, there's no word dismantle. We didn't agree to dismantle a single centrifuge. Why is the White House creating these other documents with this other language? Why don't we use the language that we actually agreed to? The sad thing is that the foreign minister of Iran is giving us a more accurate description of what's actually in the document than we're getting from our own democratically elected government. So now, there are two main issues, two main ways in which it's been mischaracterized. First of all, the notion, what Colin just said, that it freezes the program. A nuclear weapons program is 4 things. It's the enrichment facilities, the plant. It's the actual enriched material. It's a delivery system, the ballistic missiles, and it's the warhead. Right? This plan deals only with the first 2. That is the facilities and the enrichment, and it deals only with some aspects of it. Right? So while these negotiations are going on, they can move ahead with their program on all of these other lanes. There's nothing to stop them. It's only in those 2 lanes of enrichment and centrifuges that we've said anything. And as I say, only some aspects. There are 2 major ways in which it doesn't stop them. One, they're continuing to enrich to 5%, right? And they can perfect their enrichment process. So according to experts who understand this sort of thing, their current output on these first-generation centrifuges is about 50% of what it might be. So they can double it. They can learn how to increase their output and thereby shorten the breakout time while this process is going on. But worse than that, there's a massive loophole in the deal. It's this: they're allowed to have a research and development program that continues on more advanced centrifuges. So let me read to you from David Albright. This is testimony from last week. from the Senate Foreign Relations hearing. Albright is universally recognized as the foremost expert on nuclear weapons, not a neocon, not an enemy of the administration. Iran can make progress on its nuclear programs during the interim period. An area that was not frozen in the interim deal is Iran's centrifuged research and development program. In particular, Iran can continue its development of the IR-2M centrifuges, that's the second generation centrifuges, at the Natanz pilot plant under this loophole in the interim deal. And then he goes on to discuss the technical aspects of what it can do in this research program, and then he sums up. At the end of the interim period, Iran is likely to be far better positioned to deploy reliable IR-2M centrifuges on a mass scale at its enrichment plants. This gain would allow Iran to make up for lost time more quickly. So their program is moving ahead. Their enrichment program is moving ahead. The minute this interim deal ends, boom, they put in the new centrifuges, and they make up for all the lost time that they sold us. So we bought. Colin is right, as he said. We lengthened the breakout time temporarily, in a completely temporary and reversible manner, and we didn't stop them from moving ahead on their program at all. So it's a complete, all this language that you're hearing out of the administration, freeze, stop, dismantle, it's just not true. It's just not true. Now there's a second issue as well, and that's the timelines. The way they sell you on this, the way they fought against Congress, putting in the sanctions that you supported, which I supported, is by saying, hey, we've got this great deal 6 months or a year from now. It's beautiful. So hey, sit tight, don't do anything. We got this deal. This is basically the way con men operate, right? They offer you great riches down the road for concessions. You give me the money up front, and boy, I'm going to give you something fantastic down the line. But that's never going to come. There's not going to be a deal 6 months or 12 months from now. How do we know that? Oh, you can see it already in the body language of the administration. First of all, what does the president put the odds at? The president himself says less than 50-50, right? That's what the president says, and he said it a number of times. But the thing is, they want you to believe they put 6 months in the document. They put 12 months in the document. It says this is a 6-month interim deal which can be rolled over by mutual consent, right? And we aspire, we hope, to have something done within a year. But they didn't put an end point to it. They didn't guarantee. They didn't say this process ends at 1 year. So what they really defined was an open-ended process. And now it's already slipping. Look, it began to slip the minute the deal was announced on November 24th. Because then we heard, big fanfare, a deal, fantastic, historic, breakthrough, right? And then we hear, oh, well, actually, there's an implementation agreement that has to be done. And so between November then, and we had until January 20th till the implementation agreement was made. And now we're hearing language. We heard language in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee last week from Wendy Sherman that, well, there'll probably be some other interim deals along the way. We heard something similar from Catherine Ashton and the EU representative. And here's Gary Seymour. Gary Seymour was the head of counter-proliferation in the White House until last year. I think it's extremely unlikely, again, not somebody who's hostile to the administration. I think it's extremely unlikely that it will be possible to reach a comprehensive agreement in the next 6 months, said Seymour. We're in for a rolling series of extensions. Series, that's 3 or more of 6 months. That's 18 months at least. But if you just start looking at what has to be negotiated, the weapons program, the warheads, first of all, they have to admit that they have a weapons program. The warheads, the centrifuges, the levels of output, the length of the agreement, and so on, this is going to go on for years. This is going to go on for years. In fact, I predict it will go on until the president leaves office. So in the Middle East, we often find there's nothing more permanent than the temporary. This interim deal is interminable. And all during that, remember what I said at first, the program continues, right? So now the program continues under the umbrella of American power. I'll just make 2 more quick points, and then I'll get back to Colin. This is just bad negotiating, right? And we've done. There's many other aspects of this deal that I think are very, very bad, to quote Prime Minister Netanyahu. But it's just bad in basic negotiating. We made permanent, irreversible concessions to them in return for absolutely temporary and very easily reversible concessions from them, right? We gave them what they have demanded all along. We gave them, in effect, we didn't use the words, but in effect, you read the text clearly, we gave them the right to enrich, and we gave them also, written in the agreement, it says there will be a sunset clause. There will be a sunset clause, the point at which they come out from under sanctions, they come out from under any kind of special regime. How long will that sunset? It doesn't say how long it will be, but in diplomatic circles, what the number that's being thrown around at the extreme end is 20. That's what the French want. We're talking less, right? 12 or 15 years, right? I can guarantee you the Iranians are going to negotiate for 3 or 5. We'll see where it ends up. What happens at the end of that sunset clause? Iran will be treated, this is what the agreement says, Iran will be treated like any other signatory to the NPT, right? Which means Iran becomes Belgium. This country that's been a state sponsor of terrorism for 35 years, that has been violated the NPT, creating a nuclear weapons program, never admitted it's creating a nuclear weapons program, we're going to treat it like Belgium, right? We gave that to them. In return for what? In what kind of negotiation do you go in, give them what they want the most, telegraph your minimum desire, right, and then say it's a big win?
Colin, I think we have to give you a chance to respond.
Well,
Thank you, Mike.
I can do this with Mike because we're friends. Look, we tried the other pathway for a decade. When Mike was at the White House in the Bush administration, our policy was zero enrichment. It was the exact policy that Prime Minister Netanyahu has. No, 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 no. No enrichment ever, no centrifuges ever, no facilities ever, no stockpile ever. We had that for a decade. Do you know how many centrifuges there were in 2003? About 160. You know how many there are now? 19,000. We've had that position of zero for a decade, and we've had escalating sanctions and war threats going up and down for that entire period, and Iran's infrastructure has gone up, all right, not down. I will say that Iran was actually willing to freeze its centrifuge capacity at about 3,000 when Mike was in office, and because the Bush administration and our European friends insisted on zero enrichment, Iran walked away from the deal in 2005. All right? So we can have a debate about whether we led too early or whether we've had a decade of negotiations and one strategy was taken and it failed, and so we shifted course. Is this deal perfect? It is most certainly not. There are a number of issues that are not addressed. The possible military dimensions of the program are not addressed. The ballistic missile issue is not addressed. The research and development issues are not completely addressed, although they're different from what Mike suggested. The Iranians wanted actually unlimited research and development, and one of the reasons the implementing deal took a while is that the White House played hardball, that they could not install any additional centrifuges or operate any additional centrifuges. So Mike's right that they will be, 6 months from now, they will have more knowledge on IR2Ms than they have today. But they were going to have that knowledge in the absence of a deal. We're not comparing the deal to some perfect world. We're comparing the deal to what we would have had otherwise 6 months from now. This deal puts us in a better position relative to where we would have been, and David Albright believed that in those 6 months, had we not had this deal, their breakout timeline for fissile material would have been reduced to 2 weeks. All right? So is this deal perfect? It is not, which is why it's not the final deal. It's an interim deal. And look, I think one of the key issues moving forward is there enough momentum to build towards a final deal? Because nobody believes, even if one supports the interim deal, if it becomes permanent, it's not a good deal. Okay? So the question is, can you build towards a comprehensive framework? My sense is that you're likely to have one rollover period for the reason that Mike mentions. These issues are extraordinarily complex. They're not going to be wrapped up in 6 months. My sense is you could theoretically have more rollover periods, but I will tell you this. I don't think the domestic politics in our system nor in Iran's system will sustain much longer than 12 months. And before we poo-poo these interim steps, I personally believe we should go from this deal all the way up to a comprehensive deal. But what if you did have a series of interim steps that addressed the R&D issues, or the 3.5% stockpile issues, or in which Iran signed up to the additional protocol? It's not clear to me that would necessarily be bad. We should reserve judgment until we see what happens. And I will say this in closing. Iran gets about $7 billion of sanctions relief as a consequence of this. That's also reversible. All right? And most of that is access to their own money that's caught up in these escrow accounts overseas. In the next 6 months, they will lose tens of billions of additional revenue relative to where they would be because of the remaining sanctions that are in place. The oil sanctions that stay in place, the banking sanctions that stay in place. And look, I know a lot has been made about these trade delegations going to Iran, right? Everybody's saying that things are about to fall apart. A lot of it will depend on whether the Treasury Department continues to enforce our existing sanctions. And I should say, they've designated dozens of additional entities and levied hundreds of millions of dollars in fines since the Geneva Agreement. To my mind, what's worrying is not a trade delegation from France showing up in Tehran. I actually want the Iranians to see a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that really incentivizes them to sign up to a final deal. The only bad thing is if contracts start getting signed, if business in violation of existing sanctions actually starts getting done. And I will tell you that the Treasury Department folks I talk to say if they see companies and businesses that are doing that, French, Russian, Turkish, or others, there's going to be heads on sticks. And they're going to make examples of these companies. So we'll see.
Was it necessary to implicitly, actually almost explicitly, give the Iranians the right to enrich?
There is no right to enrich. There's no right to enrich in the document. There's no right. No, hold on. There's actually a meaningful difference. Okay. There are 14 countries on Earth that enrich. The United States does not recognize a right to enrich for any of them, to include Germany, Japan, etc. We recognize the fact of enrichment in countries that are otherwise compliant with the NPT, like the Netherlands or Germany or Japan. We do not recognize a right to enrich for any country, nor will we recognize one for Iran, nor does the document do it. What it does do is recognize that at the end of the day, if Iran can satisfy all of the international concerns about the peaceful nature of its program, we can envision a mutually agreed upon, constrained enrichment program in Iran. Now, look, from a non-proliferation perspective, would it be better if Iran had zero enrichment? Of course it would be better. Of course. But it wouldn't completely solve the problem because they still know how to do it. It would just lengthen the amount of time to rebuild the program. So even zero enrichment doesn't solve the problem. But would it be better? Of course it would be better. Michael cannot name a single Iran expert on planet Earth. Not one. I don't mean a advocate group or a non-proliferation expert. I mean an actual Iran expert. Not one Iran expert on planet Earth that believes that this regime will agree to zero enrichment. They will risk more sanctions. They will risk a war with the United States. They will risk a war with Israel to defend their enrichment program at some level. So is there a better world, one in which there's zero enrichment? Yes. But in pushing for that optimal deal, we'll get zero deal, and that is worse because that leaves us with an unconstrained Iran or a march towards war. Both outcomes worse than getting a deal.
Mike, obviously there's some issues to respond to, but I also want to ask you if you feel that we could have held the line longer if we would have had international support, because we need international support to maintain the level of sanctions that we have and to even grow sanctions, to maintain the policy short of the kind of negotiation that just took place.
Yeah, sure, of course we could have. The sanctions, the president also mischaracterized the sanctions bill, calling it new sanctions. The sanctions bill, as you, this audience knows very well, it would impose sanctions if they cheated or if they didn't reach an agreement within a year. I mean, it was designed to keep them from stringing us along as they have done, from whittling us down, from looking for fissures within the coalition, and so on. It was to strengthen the president's hand. I mean, I would point to Colin's argument. I mean, Colin makes a very good argument for why we need to make massive concessions to the Iranians. He makes a very good argument why people like me are really very bad news and are going to ruin the deal. And that's the exact argument that the president has been making. I'm sure you all saw the statement that came out of the National Security Council saying that anybody who's for sanctions is a warmonger. But didn't use the warmonger, but says that certain senators want war, right? And I brought this along. This is the image. This is some of you may have seen this. This was in The Economist magazine. It came out, it's a cartoon, and it shows President Obama reaching across this chasm to Rouhani. And then on this side, we have the hardliners, Khamenei, and they're trying to pull Rouhani back as he reaches out to Obama. And on this side, we have Congress with the Star of David. It's the Jewish-dominated Congress. They had to pull it because they were criticized for it. But this is the image that White House messaging itself is putting out, right? I even think it's the image that they have in their minds and when they think about why we have to make these concessions, because they think we're going to build up Rouhani against the hardliners, and they think of people like me, people in Congress who want sanctions, the Israelis, as part of the problem. So in our own messaging, we have reinforced Iranian propaganda, and we have undermined our own side. The Iranians, Colin is saying, hey, look, they got over there, they got moderates and they've got extremists, and we have to build up the moderates, or those extremists they're gonna take us all the way to war because they won't make a concession. So in other words, their good cop, bad cop routine is working on us, right? Working on us so good that Colin is pulling out a gun and shooting the bad cop on our side, right? Good cop, bad cop works against us, but it won't work against them. Right? That makes no sense to me. Even if the president actually believes that this is an accurate representation of the politics, which, by the way, I don't believe for a second, because this guy here, Khamenei, should be above it all with strings manipulating these guys over here. But even if he believed it, that's not the way he should negotiate. He should he should see himself as the leader of a coalition. That coalition includes the hardliners in Congress. It includes the Israelis. It includes the Saudis. It includes people like me. And he should put himself in a position, as Rouhani has done, to be able to say to the Iranians, hey, if you don't cut a deal with me, you got to deal with those bad guys over there, and they're going to be a lot less amenable to a deal. But that's not the position that that's not the hand that he has chosen to play. One last point on this. The trade delegations and so on. Or actually 2 points, if I may. Just one, Colin brought up George Bush and zero enrichment and all that. I'm not making that argument. I'm taking the administration at their word, that they want to get to this comprehensive. I don't actually believe it, by the way. For the record, we could talk about what I actually believe, but let's take. I'm taking them at their word. Right, that they believe there's going to be this staged process and it's going to end up in a comprehensive deal at the end. I'm saying if that's your goal, you're going about it in a very bad way, because you have telegraphed your absolute bottom line. You have telegraphed it and you said you're going for it. And anybody who doesn't agree with Colin, who doesn't accept the argument of the Iranians that they need this all of this enrichment, you work like hell to destroy, right? This makes absolutely no sense. And the other thing you've done in that regard, in terms of weakening your own position, is all of these trade delegations. The representatives of Airbus are now going to Tehran. Yes, it's true. They haven't signed a deal. But they've done two terrible things, right? One is we have created an economic lobby among our own allies in Europe against the continuation of the sanctions, right? That's huge. We're sticking pins in our own doll. This makes no sense at all. And the second thing is we are not playing to our own strength. The best card, the absolute best card that we have in this conflict is the sanctions. And sanctions work cumulatively over time. It's not a button that you press and you get a direct result. It's a slow, long, grinding process. The time works on our side. We got to a point here where they were really in crisis. Right? They were really in crisis, and we were really sticking it to them. That's the time for patience. That's the time to sit back and say, like they do to us, oh, you know what? Let's do some more study of these centrifuges and so on, and let it grind away for a while. That's what to do. But we did the exact opposite. We gave them relief, which took away from us our best tool.
Most of the sanctions are still in place.
But we gave them relief. We gave them relief.
Let's open it up for questions. Are there questions or comments from the audience? Larry. Yes. Audience, from members of the board, excuse me.
I'm Larry Edelman from Chicago. And in listening to this, first of all, it reminds me of the whole appeasement argument that happened, and we created this war called World War II. The other thing that concerns me is when we say we have this great ability to detect what Iran is doing, I think of Daroma, where the Israelis hid their nuclear program from us for a long time. So my question is really, why do you really think that we can detect what they don't want us to see?
So this is great. You know, there was some of you may have seen a report in the New York Times a week or two ago from a Defense Department study group that came out and said, look, our intelligence capabilities are not as good as we would like as it relates to detecting covert weapons of mass destruction facilities. I mean, sometimes we overestimate them, right? In the lead up to the 2003 Iraq War, for example. Look, we don't know what we don't know. I mean, I don't mean to get too Rumsfeldian, right? But we don't know what we don't know. Our intelligence community says that if Iran builds other enrichment facilities like they built in Natanz and Fordo, huge hole in the ground, you know, the contractors and all the other things, we'd see it. We don't know what we don't know. But there is no other answer to that other than getting really intrusive inspections in Iran. And here's why. I sometimes hear from folks who think that Iran is much closer to a bomb than the international community realizes, and therefore we need to take military action now. And if the premise is because they have all these covert facilities that we haven't detected. So the answer to that problem is to bomb the facilities we know about. Right? You can't bomb covert facilities out of existence. If they have a covert program, then the only way to deal with that is to discover that problem. And the only way to do that is to get the IAEA inspectors crawling all over that country with the ability to go not only to declared facilities, which they have today, but undeclared facilities and other things. So this is what I think we need to push and play hardball for as we work towards a comprehensive deal. I will tell you, while Mike thinks that the administration's gone all weak in the knees and squishy on the enrichment issue, I will tell you they're going to play hardball on numbers of centrifuges, numbers of stockpile, the types of inspections, how long that sunset clause is. The 20-year number is not the French number. It is the White House's number. By the way, I love the French example because people like Mike were saying, the French are right. They didn't like the interim deal. And then when the French signed up to the interim deal at the end, you notice the French argument slipped away. So in any case, if you're worried about the detection issue, the only resolution to that is to get inspectors on the ground. One last point, though. You know, Mike said, you know, time was on our side. Why did we push for this deal? That presumes that the Iranian regime was on the economic ropes. They were hurting. There's no question that they're under duress. But the economic sanctions have maybe done $80 to $100 billion of damage to the Iranian economy in the last 3 years. Pretty significant. The Iran-Iraq war did $600 billion of damage and killed 500,000 Iranians, and it still took the Iranians 8 years to sign a ceasefire. And it's the same guys. It's the same regime. They were not about to completely capitulate. But, according to experts like David Albright and the others, they were about to reach a technological threshold where breakout might be undetectable. So you think time was on our side? I can guarantee that if no agreement had been struck at the end of last year, Mike and friends like of his would be arguing that we were on the brink of having Iran have an undetectable nuclear weapons capability, and therefore we'd need to do something quite aggressive to deal with that problem.
Thank you. Mike, you can respond, and then let's see if there are other questions or comments from the
Just one quick statement. We're on the brink of an undetectable nuclear breakout capability, and this agreement didn't do anything to prevent that. That's my point. It would be better if they want to defy the international community again, and they want to risk war, and they want to go for a bomb. It would be better to do that under the sanctions regime as it existed 2 months ago than it is with this deal. We have legitimated them, right? Rouhani and Zarif, I agree with what Colin said. These are the same bastards they've always been. And Rouhani and Zarif are now the toast of the town in Davos. And we did that. Bibi Netanyahu is the problem. Congress is the problem. These are the good guys. We made them into the good guys. It makes no sense.
Wasn't it clear all along that we were not going to achieve our goals unless we really did have other options on the table? And these other options that have been on the table so loudly year after year just evaporated as if they never were there, because they never were intended by this administration. And without that, weren't they really surrendering to the Iranians?
Before you answer that, let's take a couple of questions together.
Yes, Marvin Israela from Westchester. First of all, thank you very much for this clarifying conversation. Mike, I want to ask you a question specifically. What do you calculate to be under the most aggressive regime of sanctions that we can imagine, what do you calculate the amount of time it would take to break the will of the current Iranian government, to break their will of creating a nuclear capability?
Dr. Duran, I would be interested to hear what your program would have been rather than the program which the administration adopted, and how enforceable would that be?
So, since our time is very limited, let's see if we can get answers to all of these questions, and let's start with you, Colin.
So I spent 3 years in the first 3 years of the Obama administration working on the military portfolio in the Middle East, which included Iran. And one of my jobs was to oversee contingency planning for anything related to Iran. I know that some people believe that Obama doesn't have it in him to take military action, but he approved the deployment of 50,000 U.S. forces and all the capabilities required to take precisely the option that is talked about into the Persian Gulf in the first 3 years of his administration. He didn't do that just for fun or because of, but because when he said all options are on the table, he wanted to make sure the table was set, not so that it would take 30 days or 60 days, but 36 hours to go. And you're right, he is not waving that stick publicly. But the Iranians are under no illusions of what we can do, but we should be under no illusions of what military action by anybody, to include ourselves, can accomplish. If the Israelis took military action, they can maybe knock the program back 2 or 3 years. If we took military action, we could probably knock it back 2 or 3 times that long, but it only delays the program, and they will rebuild the program on the other end. Unless you are prepared to sign up for an invasion and regime change in a country that's twice the size of Afghanistan, with a much more capable irregular force, then that's not a solution. Look, a diplomatic deal that puts 10 years or 20 years on the clock is probably 2 or 3 times as beneficial as the best military strike that one can imagine. So let's be serious here. We don't want, war isn't a solution to the problem that you're concerned about, that I'm concerned about, that the President of the United States is concerned about. The only solution is to change their political calculus and put them in a box of constraints and verification measures. Does this deal in and of itself do that? It doesn't. Is it a first step towards that? Maybe. Is it better than we would have otherwise been in 6 months? Yes. So let's keep going with the momentum. The last thing I would make, and I just want to circle back to the bad cop thing, because I know the sanctions issue here is, I don't want to shoot our bad cop. I don't want our bad cop to be an irreconcilable or insane cop. That is an element of our system that cannot be convinced to eliminate sanctions no matter what the Iranians do. Iran is under no illusion that if they violate this agreement or fail to move towards a final agreement, there'll be more sanctions. There's already legislation that's ready to go in the Banking Committee and the Kirk-Menendez legislation, and the president said that he would sign it. What we don't need is legislation that on its face violates the Geneva Agreement, because the sanctions are imposed now. They just allow the president to waive them now. It's on face a violation of the agreement. We don't need it. The bad cop is credible anyway. The Iranians know our system. They know that we'll slap them with additional sanctions if they violate it. So we don't need an unforced error of being unnecessarily provocative and either stirring up trouble within Iran's domestic political system, or if you don't care about that, stirring up disunity within the P5+1 and the international community, which could weaken the sanctions regime. So we don't need it. I want the bad cop to be there, but not to be an irreconcilable cop.
Thank you, Colin. Mike.
So I think our assumption has to be that this regime, the Iranian regime, will not voluntarily give up its nuclear weapons program. We have to wrest it from the talons of the regime. That's how we have to think about what we're doing. We have to put them before a very clear decision: the nuclear program or economic ruin, or worse. That has to be our goal. The only way we can do that is to work at numerous fronts simultaneously. We should put together an international coalition, which should include the Israelis and the Saudis. We should work closely with them toward mutually agreed goals. We shouldn't be cutting deals with the Iranians behind the backs of our allies and then telling our allies to sit down and shut up when the fact that we cut that deal behind their back becomes public. That sends a message of lack of resolve and weakness to the Iranians. We shouldn't pull a carrier group out of the Gulf. That sends a message of lack of resolve to the Iranians. We shouldn't lay down a red line for chemical weapons use by Bashar al-Assad, the closest ally of the Iranians, and then when he goes over our red line, not do anything about it, because that sends a lack of resolve to the Iranians. We shouldn't let the Iranians make a major muscle movement together with Hezbollah, an intervention in the civil war in Syria, and do nothing about it, not even say a word about it, because that sends a lack of resolve. We shouldn't give them sanctions relief in return for temporary and reversible concessions. The principle of negotiations should always be one-to-one reciprocity. If we're going to make a major concession on our principles, we shredded 6 Security Council resolutions with this agreement. We shredded them. The Security Council resolutions called for zero enrichment. Prior to this agreement, Iran was in breach of Chapter 5, Chapter 7 resolutions of the Security Council. Those are gone. If we're going to shred that and get rid of that principle, then we should have gotten something from the Iranians of a principled nature in return. What's a principled nature? We're saying we're selling this deal as there's going to be a big build down. David Albright says they have to get rid of, among other things, they have to get rid of 15,000 centrifuges. They have to destroy them. 15,000. We should have, as part of this deal, to get the concessions that we gave them, we should have at least already had them agree to the fact that they will destroy centrifuges and up front destroyed some of them, among other things. But last but not least, there has to be a hard end to this negotiation. It cannot be an open-ended process, which is what the administration has offered the Iranians. It's not true that this is a 6-month, 1-year process. This is a multi-year process. Watch it. Remember that I said that, and watch it. I guarantee it. Absolutely, this is a multi-year process. And if I can just say one less, I'll stop there. You got it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think you've seen a pretty good example of the different points of view on this critical issue. This is not the last debate. It certainly wasn't the first, and it's not the last debate you'll see before AJC. We are going to go back at this again at the Global Forum. You'll be there. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.